U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs threat worked on Mexico, or did it? On May the 30th, the U.S. president threatened to impose a 5% tariff on all Mexican imports, not as a response to any trade issue, but to pressure Mexico to stem the flow of incoming migrants. The idea was widely criticized even by members of his own Republican Party who control the U.S. Senate as an additional tax on U.S. consumers. 9 days later, President Trump tweeted on Friday that the Mexicans had buckled under his threat and promised to beef up border control. Was this really a win for tariffs? And is this part of a pattern of using tariffs as a political weapon? Joining me for the discussion in the studio are Qinduo, a senior fellow with the Pangoal Institution, and Harvey Dzodin, a research fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. So as I said, this happened all very fast, right? He levied the kind of threat, and then a couple of days later, a deal was done. Exactly what was going on, Harvey?
Well, I think President Trump was brilliant. He succeeded in getting Democrats, Republicans, business people, labor workers together to oppose this move because it's bad for everybody concerned.
So you were not serious when you said you not supported.
I was being facetious. And President Trump did not tell us the truth once again, because most of these agreements were made back in December and also in February. So they're reheated agreements that were made by prior discussions with the Mexicans. And I think that it was just political theater. President Trump frequently does this. He invents a situation, a crisis, and then he saber rattles, and then he solves the problem, and it goes away, and he takes credit for the situation he created. I think that's this.
Could there be any possibility that this threat really worked on the Mexicans, Qinduo?
I would say so, actually. Even let's say the Mexicans, repackaged those promises and then resold it to Donald Trump, President of the United States here. But remember, for the Mexicans, I would say there's a real sense of feeling of like they are also tired of those illegal migrants from, say, Honduras or Guatemala. And so they say, let's do something. This is also for our own sake. And also remember, they rely heavily on the U.S. market in terms of export. 80% of Mexico export go to the United States. So they have to do something in order for their own economic benefits over here. So they have to satisfy to a certain degree.
To play along, at least.
Yeah, to play along with the President Trump over
Okay,
there.
Harvey?
Yeah, I agree with that to the extent that it did move it slightly and did create a crisis that had to be resolved by the Mexicans. And it's part of President Trump's usual MO in another way, because he's a master of the madman theory, that he's unpredictable. You never know what he's going to do. And he said in a speech during the campaign about foreign policy, he said, our foreign policy is too predictable, and I intend to be unpredictable. And I think
maybe that's his strategy.
It is his strategy.
By the way, on the thing about China, right, he has been for the past few decades saying pretty much the same thing. So in that sense, he's also very, very predictable.
Yeah, he's consistent.
So okay, so there is a little bit of
but there are dangers, I would say. This is a good example of bullying could work. If that is it, then we are changing from, say, the rules-based world order to the law of jungle. That is, if I'm powerful, if I'm big, I basically dictate what you do. You do what I told you to do. So this is, I wouldn't say this is really bad, I would say, for middle powers or small powers in this world. And also another danger for Mexico is like 3 months into the future, if they failed to meet the quota, or there are still flow of migrants in the southern border of the United States, and Trump could be angry again. Remember those tariffs, they were delayed, they were not cancelled.
They were suspended.
So basically you're saying, the root cause of the problem is not being addressed enough, because right now Mexico is saying it's going to send more troops, more National Guards to the border. But exactly what's going to stop movement of these migrants?
They said they're going to send 6,000 National Guards to the southern border, and actually across the country in the southern border. It's a very small number. And we have a different concept in America of what a National Guards person is. It's a very professionally trained part-time soldier. But in Mexico, these are more like, I think, Keystone Cops. They're police. They're not military. They're not semi-military. So they're people who are untrained. They're going to go to the southern border. People take pictures of them. I don't think they're going to be effective. And I'm not a betting person, but I'm also willing to bet money that President Trump is going to be back complaining and saying the deal is not working out, and here come the tariffs again.
Well, I'm kind of curious because in the beginning you said President Trump got support from across the board in the political, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party for his policy, of course, support in a sarcastic sense. What about China? When he levies this kind of tariffs against China, there seemed not to be this kind of unanimous support.
Well, I think China...
I mean, opposition, let's put it this way.
I know. But I think China now, because of President Trump, is the country that Americans love to hate, because he set up such a high bar for China and said so many bad things about them. And I do hope that he hears what President Xi had talked about in your first segment. I think it's very important. But I also think that President Trump will be back on this. And I think that if you look at the political polls, you can see the latest CNN poll finds that with regard to trade, 47% of Americans disapprove of President Trump's handling. Only 41% approve. So I think even the American public disapprove not only of what's happening with Mexico, but what's happening with China and the rest of the world.
Well, maybe is it because that their lives is maybe more visibly affected, associated with production in Mexico, that there's such a strong... I don't know. What could
well,
be
as
the other
time
factors?
goes on, you can see the effects of the tariff war, let's say, is becoming true for more and more Americans and also the companies, especially the farmers. So there is a growing discontent, and I mean we'll see effects on the economy. In particular, for example, the job report is worse than expected, and a lot of figures. So there's a concern of like if the tariff war continues, probably the economy, the growth prospect will be affected. So that is in the U.S. economy matters a lot as in any other country.
Sure. Well. Again, you have to address, in Chinese we say, you have to address the source of the problem, right, instead of just cure the symptoms. So here, by putting more National Guards on the border, by pressuring Mexico to do more, but actually these migrants don't come from Mexico. They come from other countries that were, going through Mexico.
No.
So is there anything being done by the Trump administration to help those people stay where they come from?
No, actually, he has done the opposite. Recently, he has basically scaled back the development aid to the three countries, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. Remember, all those people, they are fleeing their country because of, they're fleeing what? They're fleeing from violence, they're fleeing from poverty, etc. So, if you don't develop, if there's no decent living standard, if there are no jobs, people will leave. That's the root cause of the so-called illegal immigration over there.
But it seems that President Trump doesn't see it his problem, or he says, why should I spend so much money to help? I don't know, Harvey, it seems that what we are talking about as logic is not what they understand as logic.
When you say they, I think President Trump, his advisors like Stephen Miller, and his base, these conservative, rather uneducated adult males, are looking for red meat from the president. They want to see those National Guardsmen on the border preventing those Guatemalans and the others from coming in, because President Trump has convinced them that the country is being invaded. That's a word he's used. The country is under siege. So again, I say it's political theater.
Yeah, what about the source of the problem, to help these people stay where they are?
No. It's President Trump doesn't want to help them. because they don't want to spend the money.
But that's not going to help the situation. I mean,
well,
to me,
what
that's really obvious.
The situation that President Trump is looking at is in November of 2020. He wants to be reelected, so he needs to throw big pieces of red meat to the people who support him. Because if you look at the states that count, the battleground states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Iowa, the people who voted for him the last time are not in favor of a lot of his policies. So he needs to throw all this red meat to the lions to get their votes.
But is such a pact with Mexico going to add to his popularity, Qinduo?
Well, at least temporarily, I would say so. I totally agree with my friend here. That is like, he's looking at his re-election in 2020. And also remember his slogan, his principle, like America first. He doesn't really care much about what's going on in Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. But it's controversial. It's, I would say, contradictory with the U.S. foreign policy. When the U.S. officials talk about the Monroe Doctrine, it's like Latin America, that's the backyard of the United States.
Yeah.
But the U.S. is paying no attention simply to their living standard over there. That's unfair.
Harvey, one sentence or two?
That Mexican people
the popularity, that this pact is going to help President Trump or not in terms of popularity?
Temporarily.
Okay, let's wait and see. We still have some time to go, so a lot of more red meat is probably necessary. All right, we have to leave it there. Many thanks to Qinduo and Harvey Dzodin. And with that, we wrap up this edition of The Point with me, Lu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.